All right, all. Welcome to today's session. Today we'll be picking up where we left off from our last Fundraising Friday, which was getting off the bench, fundraising benchmark for beginners. So this is part two. I hope you all were able to review the last session's recording or materials. A lot of that was ground setting. For today's discussions, we will spend some time recapping what we went over, but a lot of those details were caught in the last training we did on Halloween, actually, so just a couple weeks ago. Did anyone was anyone able to join that session or had any questions from that session that they wanted to bring up right at the top of this? Go ahead and unmute yourself. And no, I can't see the screen. So if you have any questions, we can field that. But please feel welcome to stop to put your questions in the chat because we are going to recap that math part pretty quickly at the top of this session. Check the chat real quick. Lisa, you have a goal. I'm working on our end of year campaign and I'm relatively new to the fundraising space. I'm here to learn and apply these learnings to our goals in 2026. Yes, and it's a great starting place. I know benchmarking can be scary, but I think you'll see today the benefits of maybe, as you're new in implementing benchmarking in this practice and making it part of your everyday and how it can help you. So I'm really glad you're here today, Lisa. Please feel free to, come off mute, chat, ask your questions. And we will also have a portion at the end of today's session with Q&A. So feel free to stick around that. So for today's session, we're going to be taking the next step in benchmarking and have the discussion around benchmarking. We'll be talking about how to use your newfound benchmarking skills in your storytelling and specifically in your pitch. And we'll talk about what your pitch means, because I think we might have two ideas of what a pitch can be, and we've had those two outlined here. Really quickly, just an introduction to Progressive Multiplier. So Progressive Multiplier's vision is a sustainable progressive movement with the scale and power to achieve justice, realize democracy, and restore the environment. So we believe that money multiplied is change amplified. So we help the progressive movement groups achieve sustainability and scalability by strengthening their catalytic revenue generation capacities. That's a lot of words. So essentially, we help groups find financial resiliency and sustainability through rev gen tactics. Rev gen tactics can lie anywhere between, fundraising, diversifying their fundraising channels, or some fee for service kind of products. Really helping build that foundation of financial resilience in today's progressive movements. So here's the PM team today. This is just a quick overview of our team. We actually have two new team members starting today. So the next Fundraising Friday, you'll see 8 current staff members, but these lovely ladies are what makes our team go. So today's learning objectives. The last time we met, we covered the basics of why we might think about benchmarking, as well as common pitfalls that folks face whenever we start thinking about data. We also talked about 3 fundamental metrics that can really help you better understand your work. This week, we will be taking what we learned and discussing how these benchmarks can help you better tell your story. So today's learning objectives are use the donor lifetime value, fundraising ROI, and cost per dollar raised to benchmark against industry standards and yourself. Leveraging benchmarking data to communicate internally about investment and fundraising channels and strategies. And the last one, leveraging benchmarking to sharpen storytelling and stewardship strategies. So what can you expect today? Overall, we want this to be a participatory learning space that's safe for everyone. So we're all here to learn from each other. I definitely have experiences that I can bring to the table, and I'm sure you all have experiences that I can learn from and benefit from as well. So I want to be super clear that this is very much an ask all questions you possibly can think of space. If you're not clear, chances are that someone else isn't in the room either. So please feel free to, ask questions, raise your hands. I definitely love a chit chat rather than speaking at people. So that's how we want to kind of field this and also encourage all of us here to make that connection with each other to kind of form the support network that we have here. So really quickly, very similar to our last session, I wanted to get a kind of read on who we have in the room. So before we get going, I want to do a temp check of kind of where we all are with benchmarking. In the chat, please use the emoji or number here to represent where you are on your benchmarking journey. So it's really helpful in setting the basis of where we're at today. So are you a 1 where you're kind of like, I don't know what benchmarks are at all. I'm starting from 0. Are you a 2? We have some of the pieces, but we're still trying to figure out how they fit. Are you a 3? You're ready to take off the training wheels, your systems are set. You got historical data at your fingertips as well, and you're ready to start applying them. Are you a 4 and you can switch with me and give me a little break in between and start teaching this session? Okay, so we got 2s and 1s. Awesome. What questions are you bringing into this space? I know, Lisa, you mentioned at the top that you are kind of new to the space and you're just here to learn. Does anybody else have a particular question that they've kind of wrangled in or they're coming into this hoping to get some answers for or some insight? And that's okay. How to get buy-in from other teams on supporting fundraising. Well, Kate, please stick around. Benchmarks are going to be your biggest tool, right? And I'm glad you're here for today's discussion. I really think that this is the missing key in a lot of conversations we're having. I know I've sat in organizations where fundraising is not supported, or it's kind of the last thing to be considered. And benchmarking really helps us move that forward and helps us make it more tangible and approachable. It helps put this new kind of dimension on fundraising that I hope you'll be able to kind of see in today's session. So let's quickly recap what we chatted about in our last session with Maria, my colleague. So now that we have a sense of who's in the room, let's recap a bit. Does anyone want to share why they think benchmarking is important for us to integrate into our practices? I did provide a spoiler just now.
You have to have a goal. We want to be specific about what we're trying to accomplish when we are starting a fundraising round.
Yes, absolutely. And Jennifer also added it helps inform strategy, which is probably the top line of benchmarking and what you should be using benchmarking for. You don't want to kind of walk into a situation and kind of like throwing spaghetti at a wall and seeing what'll stick, especially with the resources and the capacity that a lot of our groups have today. We don't have the freedom to just figure it out and move forward. Having an informed strategy through benchmarking really helps up. It's great, guys. So, perfect. So we know why benchmarking is important. Absolutely. Informing strategy and having a clear starting point. Let's make sure we're all clear and understand what it means in terms of today's discussion. So benchmarks help us understand our efficiency and sustainability. They can help us evaluate our program performance and set better goals for our work. There are 3 types of benchmarking. We only went over 1, but I wanted to kind of acknowledge the other 2. So Maria spent a lot of time talking about one type of benchmarking, and we're still going to live in that area, but I wanted to acknowledge the two other ones, right? We have impact metrics, which are the metrics that measure progress toward the long-term vision of the organization. So a lot of this you'll see in when you talk big picture about your work, or when your ED is talking big picture here. The second is activity metrics. So these metrics measure progress towards the work of the organization. And the third is capacity metrics. So this is the world we're kind of living in for this session and these workshops here. These metrics measure the organization's ability to get things done. So the last time we chatted, we spent a lot of time covering tactic and task related goals. So the fundraising efficiency metrics such as the ROI, the cost per dollar raised, and the donor lifetime value. So let's also another refresher here, defining and calculating these benchmarks. Um, would anyone Does anyone remember how these are defined? You're welcome.
Hi there. Sorry, everybody, to be late, but good to see you. Anybody want to take a crazy wild guess as how you would calculate cost per dollars raised?
Is it the amount of staff time and other costs that go into like your annual like
Sort of.
campaign raise? Yeah.
Those are important numbers to have top of mind. So Kate wrote in the chat, cost per dollar raise is a measure of fundraising efficiency that calculates how much you paid to raise each dollar. Yes. So gold star, Kate. A measure of fundraising efficiency that calculates how much you paid to raise each dollar. So think of how much did you spend 25 cents for every dollar that you raised. It helps really kind of level set that work. Kate, yes, you are on the upswing. Thank you for watching that there.
And Sabrina, when you say how much you spent, but that goes into like the hard cost, your staff time and
Absolutely.
other expenses. So it's really
Yeah.
a budgeting exercise.
Yes. All of this really is a budgeting exercise, right? Because we also have the ROI. So the ROI and the CPDR are very closely related, and a lot of the times I prefer to talk in CPDR. I know other folks like to talk in ROI and percentage wise. I find that when I'm talking CPDR to my board members, it really hits home because I'm using the actual on the dollar how much we're raising, whereas sometimes a percentage hits a little bit more. So the ROI is a percentage measure of fundraising efficiency by comparing money raised to money spent. The last one here, we have our donor lifetime value. So this is the predicted average dollar amount that a donor will give to your organization over their lifetime. This is the tricky one, but this is also the fun one for me to kind of look into and see who our donors are. Anyone have questions on this?
Yeah. How do you calculate that?
Good question.
Yeah.
So for the let me catch up on this one. So let's review those first two benchmarks, right? The CPDR and the ROI. We talked last time about how ROI and CPDR are both fundraising efficiency benchmarks. What data do we need to be able to calculate the ROI and CPDR? Jennifer, I know you mentioned some expenses, some budgeting tracking, but there are really only two key pieces of data that you need that kind of will help you figure out these numbers right here. And that's total raised and total spent. So the total spent I know is the trickier number to figure out your expenses, right? That's going to be your total, like how much your direct mail campaign costs, how much if you had a graphic designer working on whatever, fundraising campaign you had, that's going to be in the total spent. in that number right there. But these are the two big bucket numbers that you want to be able to have access to when you're calculating both ROI and CPDR. So they're both calculated differently, but they're using the same types of data. Tiffany, is there any kind of rule of thumb when you're calculating total spent? I know that's the one I think that I get the most questions about.
It depends a lot on how you actually represent your budget. So at Progressive Multiplier, we actually like drill down to we think it's so hard to describe unless I have a visual, and I don't want to get into that right now. It depends on like how you are calculating the people call them overhead costs, but like all of the all-in costs on your program, for instance, or on your development program specifically. And so, for instance, like we would think about our total spend as including what it takes to make sure that Sabrina has a computer for her work and all of those things. And like a portion of the cost of her computer is actually rolled into what we think of as our total spend in the department, in the development effort. And so it really varies based on how you actually do your budgeting, whether you're going to be comparing just what it costs you to have the staff and do the mailing, or really representing your budget as an all-in spend for everything that it takes to actually do that work, which isn't a neat answer, but that's the answer I have.
Thank you, Tiffany. All right, so how do we calculate CPDR? So again, we're recapping, so I'm gonna be moving through this a little bit quicker than probably we would be. So feel free to slow us down and ask your questions. So CPDR, again, is the measure of how much it costs you to raise each dollar you bring in. If the CPDR is less than $1, you're making a positive return on your investment. If it's more than $1, you're losing money. However, the kind of asterisk and caveat there is that your CPDR is based on your existing donations, kind of like your existing infrastructure that you have. Acquisition is always going to be an investment, and you're always going to have a higher CPDR. So note there that using CPDR as a benchmark on acquisition campaigns might not be the best benchmark to use there as that. So let's see how this math works out. So again, highlighting the two big numbers and big bucket numbers that we need to calculate that is the total spent divided by the total raised. In the example we have here, the total spent, so our expenses total was $3,000, and we raised $5,000. So put that math together, divide 3,000 by $5,000, and the CPDR for this particular campaign was 60 cents the dollar. How would you guys categorize that? Is that successful? Is that a okay CPDR? Do you think they could do better?
Like, it depends on what your position is. If you're the finance CFO,
That's true.
probably going to be like, no.
That is very true, right? The language is a bit different, especially around our finance colleagues, sitting there looking being like you spent $60, 60 cents for every dollar. So absolutely. But this is how we can get the CPDR and apply it, right? So benchmarking is just another tool that you can apply within context when you're making your pitches and when you're talking about the efficiency of your fundraising work.
Hey, Sabrina.
Mm-hmm.
I'll just chime in to add that that whole it depends about whether the 60 cents on the dollar is a good thing or a bad thing. It's a really good thing if your CPDR in your last campaign was 80 cents on the dollar. It's not so great if your CPDR on the last campaign was 20 cents on the dollar. So I think, I mean, obviously I'm saying something that everybody intuitively understands, but why the reason I say that is that the number of 60 cents on the dollar is not inherently either or. It depends on like how efficient you want to be and how close you are to that efficiency rating. And the fact is, you may not know yet how efficient you want to be. Because if you haven't started doing these benchmarks, then what you're trying to do is understand like, where are we at the ground? What is our opening once we start doing this kind of evaluation, where do we land? If we land at 60 cents, is there a way for us to get down to 55 cents? Or if we land at 80 cents, can we get down to 60 cents? And sometimes, is it worth having your CPDR go up from 20 cents to 30 cents? Because it also, like, whatever it is you're doing may also get more viral, might encourage people that are giving to pass the word on to other people. And so it works as an acquisition tool, even if it costs you a little bit more in each dollar raised, because acquisition is so expensive that if word of mouth is the way that you actually start to acquire more people, you're not putting a lot of money into that. You're putting it into the solicitation and getting the ancillary benefit of the word of mouth. So recognize that, like, there's not one perfect sweet spot for every organization. It's about where you've been and where you're going and like what your priorities are in the moment.
Absolutely. And Jennifer put in the chat, Tiffany, that her organization's CFO wants to get to 10-cent CPDR.
I wish you the best of luck.
I know. Yeah.
Oh, go ahead,
Yeah.
Jennifer.
But I appreciate what you just said. It's like we're in acquisition phase. And so it's like, yeah, when we're mature and have, automation and everything else going on, that maybe 20 to 30 cents, but yeah, it's not realistic. They need more
Yeah.
education.
Well, and remember also that, like, calculating your acquisition cost is different than calculating your CPDR, because you're often going to find that the acquisition cost is closer to $2 or somewhere in that range, because it just costs more to acquire. And that's
Yeah.
where, and now I am acting as a plant, but that's where getting into the lifetime value of a donor is a more important measure when you think about acquisition, but not to get too far ahead of ourselves. But I share that with you, Jennifer, so that the next time your CFO starts to get in the hobby horse about 10 cents on the dollar, remember that there's the difference between the acquisition cost and the cost per dollars raised. And if you gotta, call him back up for us to help your CFO understand that, we're here.
Yes. Another little plug of the one-on-one sessions that we offer you, and we can help you work through this to make this pitch. But Jennifer and Tiffany kind of hit on some things that we're going to pick up on a little later in this presentation. But first, I wanted to go ahead and, nope, not that one, this one, talk about ROI really quickly, because this is the other important measure right here. So calculating ROI can be tricky. It's a measure of how efficient an org has been in developing their fundraising practice. So let's take a look at the numbers we have here. We raised 5,000 and spent 3,000. Using this formula, we can say that our ROI was 66.67%. So again, the formula is using those two big number buckets there, the total raised and your total spent. So the formula goes total raised subtracted by the total spent divided by the total spent to give us that percentage number here. Again, it is within context, right, of talking about the efficiency of our fundraising tactics and programs. And I see we have a question really quick. Can you talk more about the difference between acquisition spend and non? Like, is this also relevant if 90% of your funding is institutional grants and you don't focus on individuals? I would say no, right? Well,
So yes, Sabrina, I agree with you. I think, Jasmine, the thing to consider here is that the acquisition cost for acquiring a funder is a completely different calculation than it is for acquiring a donor. Because what you're thinking about over the long term of acquiring a grant, an institutional grant, is that is like an 18-month horizon, right? So every person who's working on acquiring that grant, their work is part of the spend to acquire that grant. We spend our time trying to help you figure out how to raise independent revenue that's not dependent on institutional grants. And so when we think about the acquisition spend, we're thinking about the acquisition of individuals, less than we're thinking about it for institutional giving. And we're happy to do a session to help you, like one-on-one, to help you think through how to talk about that. But in terms of the acquisition cost of bringing in a funder, but it's I believe, if I were to go back to the data, that the time is shorter and the dollar figure is smaller to acquire individual donors, um, because of the deep mechanics of going into what it costs you to bring in an institutional grant and how many different bodies have to be a part of that process. And at what rate are those people, if you bring in your executive director for 3 meetings at 3-hour-long meetings with this institutional funder at their hourly rate, like that's a big chunk of change, right? So it's a very different calculation to figure out what it costs you to acquire an institutional funder versus an individual donor.
Yeah, and that's a good point to make, is making sure that you are really when you're looking at your data, you're segmenting out your data, and a large $1 million grant isn't fitting into like an annual cost, like your annual operating fund, that you're looking at apples to apples, right? So donors to donors, and then figuring out the costs of your institutional program and even your events program as well. You can definitely calculate them out. I know events, probably I stepped in that one, and that one is one that I like to use, showcasing when we're making a pitch. Again, I'm getting ahead of myself there. We'll talk about that too. But yeah, making sure that the numbers are, you're not kind of mixing those lines, because they are so different here. So Tiffany mentioned a little while ago the next fundraising efficiency benchmark that we talked about last time with Maria, and this is the donor lifetime value. So the donor lifetime value, it has different buckets of information and data that we need other than the CPGR and the ROI. So when we're looking at any benchmark, the first question we want to ask ourselves is, why would it be useful to me, and what question doesn't answer? So can anyone tell me why we would want to pull, or why we might think about needing a donor lifetime value? What insight would this provide to you if you were to pool your donor lifetime value on, like, let's say, your recurring donors? What does it tell you?
Everybody seems so quiet today. Take a wild guess about what you think the lifetime value tells you about your donors.
And it's icky, right? Putting a price tag on donors you're having here, but we're not kind of looking at them as, Lisa, whether they are high value or not. Kate, predicting the average amount a donor will give in their lifetime. Yes. Well, yes, it's how, like, what impact they can bring to the organization over the lifetime that they've been with the organization. And Lisa, whether they're high value or not, I want to kind of not whether they're high value. So this isn't a wealth indicator, but high value in maybe strategy and targeting, right? We'll get into what that means a little bit later. So high value in a sense, but not as a wealth indicator. So we're not
And
looking at
I'll
major
also
donors.
just add here. Oh,
No, go ahead, Tiffany.
sorry, there was a lag and I didn't hear that you were speaking, Sabrina. So just taking a look at this chart, recognize that we're talking about over this donor lifespan is 5 years, and you're looking at their average donation over the course of that 5 years. Recognize that once you've gotten this number figured out and you understand what the quote unquote lifetime value is, there's a couple things you might think about adjusting, right? Like, can we increase the donor lifespan? What are we doing that's making them drop off after 5 years or not persist beyond 5 years? And if we like, and what do we know about whether, if we got them to give less frequently with a bigger gift, could we increase the size of that gift in the course of a year, or more frequently with a smaller gift, but doing it every month or whatever? Once you've understood sort of what the lifetime value there, you can start to tweak with what are the inputs that we might be able to shift to increase that lifetime value.
Absolutely. And I wanted to kind of also now hone in on the kind of building blocks of what makes this benchmark. And that's the average donor lifespan, the average donation, and your average donation frequency. So I know this is, for some of us, might be new, and we might not have that data right on hand, but this also kind of gives you an idea of like how you should be looking at your data and what's important to know about your work. So this is very different from the actual like big picture total spent, total raise costs. This kind of gets down into the nitty gritty of like who makes up that donor cohort that you're looking at. Kate, would you want to calculate one-time donors and monthly donors separately with this metric? I would. I think it's great to use them and benchmark them against each other to really calculate the value, right? This is where we just kind of going back to what we previously talked about with high value donors or not. Are your one-time donors going to bring you more lifetime value over your recurring donors? What does that look like, and how do they kind of match up? And that really will help you kind of zone in on, what your strategy is. Is that you're going to invest in an acquisition campaign because over a period of time, your recurring donors have a higher lifetime value than your one-time annual donors do. So you definitely can use them to benchmark your data against each other. So I would say yes. So calculating these, it's pretty straightforward here. We just multiply them all together. So the life span times the average donation amount times the average frequency, and it'll give you your DLV here. And the example we're seeing a 5-year average donor lifespan. The donation is about an average of $10, and they're giving about 2.5 times a year. And that would equal that this particular donor has a lifetime value of $125. So that was a quick and breeze through on those benchmarks and how to calculate them and kind of like the basics of those. I know we went really fast on that, but to get to the next part, I wanted to make sure that everyone was grounded, and I wanted to just leave a minute or two to see if we need to go back and revisit any concepts, or if you wanted to kind of charge ahead and see how these particular benchmarks and these metrics will help sharpen your pitch and your storytelling. You can put your questions in the chat or come off mute. But if there's anything still kind of floating around, feel free. Yeah. No? Okay. Offer is open throughout the entire conversation we have here. And again, we have Q&A later today. But let's move forward. So what's the story, right? How do these benchmarks tell our fundraising story? So we've learned to calculate some key fundraising efficiency benchmarks. Now what? In the bigger picture, what can these numbers do for us? Well, they can help us tell our story. Now, when we think about telling our story, I know many of us might default into thinking about how we tell our story externally and to our community, right? Like we do that 2-minute elevator pitch about who we are, what our organization is, and programs we offer. But I'd like to ask the group, really, how many of us can tell our fundraising story with nuance? Can we tell it to our colleagues and our teammates? And how many of us can advocate for our funding strategies, projection, and budget? I know not a lot of us can. I know that starting out, it was difficult for me.
Has anybody in the room practiced this, has experience thinking about how to tell the fundraising story outside of the department, or even as you bring people into your department?
I can chime in. We have
Sure.
been doing some financial reports for our board to really key them in on some of our fundraising practices. We just adopted a new CRM, so we're really trying to highlight the value that has brought to our fundraising strategy. And we have put into place a lot of these metrics and measurements, but I think that we could do a lot better with highlighting some more benchmarks that would maybe play better to some of our internal teams as well.
Awesome, Kate. Thank you for sharing. All right. So benchmarking really helps us paint a clearer picture, right? CPDR, ROI, and DLV are just a few of the fundraising benchmarks we have. There are tons that you can implement, but really we always, if you're looking for a starting place, we recommend these three. And the reason why we recommend these three benchmarks as your kind of starting and entry point into the world of fundraising efficiency metrics is really starts with a scenario that I think we've all kind of gone through in our lives. But first, again, fundraising benchmarks can give a clearer picture of what success looks like. It encourages sustainable growth, and it sets realistic goals and expectations. Emphasis on setting realistic goals and expectations. I know I have been in a situation where I come into an organization and all of a sudden it is April and we are being told what our fundraising goal is. We walk into a meeting and they say, great, development folks, you are here. We have done all our strategic planning. We bestow upon you a $5 million budget. Go forth and raise money. And all of that, has to happen within the first 2 quarters of the fiscal year. And there's also here your expense budget is staying the same for this fiscal year. I know I've had those experiences. A show of hands if anyone also does. This is a safe space, I will say. It is not a unique experience. I know I'm looking at Tiffany because Tiffany and I actually used to work together at a
Yes,
different
we
organization.
worked together in another lifetime before this one. And this has happened to me. I would say I've been a fundraiser for since the 1900s, we'll just say. And more often than not, actually, this is how the fundraising team is brought into the goal, quote unquote, goal making for fundraising, which is to say that the rest of the organization gets to ask for all the things that they want. And then they come to the development team and say, okay, development, please make sure that you raise enough money for everybody else in the organization to get what they want. Okay. And that doesn't take into account any of the things that we're talking about here in terms of what actually feeds the picture of how we get to the goal and whether that goal was actually predicted by the information that we have. So
Yeah.
love to hear from anybody else who's had an experience like that, particularly if you have found a way to navigate it effectively.
Yeah, remember CPDR, ROI, and DLV will have the most impact on how to tell your fundraising story. This is your fundraising story to your colleagues, your board, your ED, people who are making this ask of you and who probably don't have insight to the everyday kind of machinations of fundraising the way we do, the way we're in it. So we can use these benchmarks and more to set our fundraising plan up for success. Again, kind of emphasizing that setting realistic goals and expectations for where we're at right now. We might not be able to hit a $5 million budget, but that does not mean that we can not hit that in the next year, 2 years if we plan smart. It takes money to make money, right? So these benchmarks can help us figure out how much of an investment the organization will have to make in order to secure our long-term financial goals. This is going to help us really say, we can't we can't raise your $5 million if our expense budget is at $20,000. I please, help us if coming with the CPDR and your ROIs showing that money will help you paint that picture for folks who are not in this work every day. So remember, leaders and board members respond to data-driven reasoning. So yes, building your dashboards and your metrics for your board to have that kind of buy-in and that framework into what your fundraising strategy looks like is a very smart move to implement. If we were able to demonstrate that the ROI of a digital campaign is higher than a gala, that really helps us make a smarter decision, right, on where we invest our dollars and our organizational resources. So I know a lot of us here will sit and be like, oh, the annual gala is coming together and it raises $1 million, but it takes us, $700,000 in expenses to make. Really having that and using that and putting that kind of data into the CPDR, the ROI, you would use an ROI in that space, to really talk about like, hey, let's take the money that we are investing in this scala and split it up or like reinvest it into donor acquisition, which we know is the highest cost strategy that we have on plan right now. Will help you kind of strengthen your pitch to your colleagues moving forward. So again, what's the story? It helps sharpen our storytelling. So benchmarking can help us find the most efficient ways to connect with our supporters. Data helps you understand how all of the components of your fundraising plan are working together. Information gleaned from these top-line benchmarks helps serve as the foundational information that helps inform your tactics and your fundraising strategy. We've mentioned it before, but ultimately these benchmarks help us answer key questions. For example, your DLV will help you kind of get the answers to questions such as, how do different acquisition sources compare over time? Should I prioritize recurring or one-time gift donors in my strategy and campaigns this year? ROI and CPDR will help you come to the answers for questions such as, does the higher cost of this donor acquisition tactic yield high gains? How can I most effectively allocate my budget? How can I best illustrate the story of the efficiency of our fundraising program? So let's take a look at an example really quick. You recently run your analysis on, spoiler, you've recently run your analysis on your organization's recurring donors. Here's what you found. The average giving for your recurring donors is $25 a month, and their average lifetime is about just over 6.5 years. There was a spoiler, but can someone do the DLV? Do we know what the DLV would be, given the data here? And just to clarify, we're talking about recurring donors, so those donors who give once a month all year. Does anyone want to take a shot or remember what it takes to calculate the DLV, the donor lifetime value for the recurring donor? All right, we'll move forward because I know the math isn't on the screen right now. Math is not my strong suit. So calculating it total here, our recurring donor lifetime value for this set of donors, for this certain segment of donors, will be $1,980. That is an impressive lifetime value for a recurring donor to have. And it really helps kind of set the strategy around your recurring donors, right? So what can this one benchmark, the DLV here, tell us about our recurring donors?
Given that most monthly donors don't have to be solicited every month, right? They're getting a regular cadence of thanks, but they're giving consistently because their gifts are automated. This is actually like a very low investment. Like there's a very low investment for the lifetime giving value here. So this is a high value donor for you because your cost for each dollar is quite low.
Yes. I would say the implications of what the DLV also has on your stewardship strategy, your engagement strategies also needs to be taken into consideration when you come to this number. right? So I know we talked about this again. So remember, DLV gives you consistent apples to apples way to comparing your data. So recurring donors to you can benchmark against current recurring donor strategies to former current recurring donor strategies, and it really helps you define out where you're at with your strategies. All right. So what's the story of our recurring donors? We can say that a monthly donor giving at $25 a month has a DLV of close to $2,000, right? Which may justify investment of a dedicated recurring / sustainer campaign that you are looking to have in the next fiscal year. We can solidly align fundraising goals to organizational goals. So how much should we grow the recurring donor line if we want to increase our organizational goal, fundraising goal by X% next year? We can look at our recurring donor line and see, is there investment there? Is there growth there that we can make? We can see and communicate out the investment donors are putting into the organization on a year-over-year trend tracking basis, right? So are they staying with us as recurring donors? Have their gifts increased? What's been the change to the DLV over, an increased lifetime? So we're really thinking using this benchmarking and thinking about engagement, acquisitions of fundraising strategies, your messaging, and your stewardship here. So benchmarking lends credibility to our fundraising strategies, right? So if we are seeing strong indicators in our benchmarks, we know we're on the right track. We're able to make a strong pitch for investment, increased capacity, and informed collaboration across your organization. Strong indicators of your benchmark tells you that you have your strong tactics, your tactics are correct. You have donor confidence, they're buying into how you're doing not only the work that you're doing, but how your fundraising model is going. They are buying in and they're not avoiding your emails, they are answering every call that you make. And it also helps us, make sure that our messaging is effective and our communication out to them. So how does this show up? Again, for the donor lifetime value, we see strong donor retention. We see smart engagement and stewardship and effective messaging. We can take this, the DLV and apply those and look at those tactics. For the ROI and CPDR, we can see these show up in effective fundraising channels, campaign success, and resource allocation. So benchmarking doesn't just help us prepare for making well-planned asks of our donors. It strengthens our stewardship of the relationship between us, between the relationships between our donors and us as well. So how do these particular benchmarks inform stewardship strategies? Well, we can use them to develop smarter campaigns. If we know our recurring donors are a high value segment, we might consider prioritizing that list for personal stewardship, right? If you only have so much time to write out a thank you card, you can definitely look at, well, what's the highest return? Who is our high value donors that have stayed with us for a while? And that might be your recurring donor list segment. So you're going to ask your ED to spend some, that 1 hour that, we all kind of fish for on the calendar, writing out thank you notes or making calls to those certain sets of donors, because the impact that it'll have on their DLV is great. It, feeds into retention and stronger relationships between you and the donor. We can use the data collected to craft impactful calls to action for donors. So think of the pitches that you hear where we go, every $5 donated will feed X amount of families this year for Thanksgiving. That is actual math that you can do and collaborate in with your program department, right? To frame the work that you're doing for your donors and increase your effective messaging. Can acknowledging the power, building momentum of the supporter base by showcasing recurring giving as high impact sustainable choice. Again, our sustainer and recurring program ask campaigns, a lot of the time there's that ask of, double your impact or increase your impact by, becoming a monthly donor instead. That's what we're talking about. And by actually like framing out what that means, over your lifetime, if you choose to become a recurring donor for the next 3 years, this is the impact. You can have a $1,000 impact on the organization. And this is what that means moving forward. It also highlights any gaps we might be experiencing with supporters. So if we're not retaining donors, what's missing? What's going wrong? Remember, low retention might indicate that we need to improve our how we communicate impact and gratitude, right? That means we have to go back to our stewardship strategy and engagement and looking at, are we doing our due diligence to make sure that our donors know that they are important to the organization, and are we only going back to them when we're making a pitch and an ask? Low recurring donor conversion could translate to, we need to better our storytelling to emphasize consistency there. That's how we can take a look at these numbers. I know we also swinged through pitch, but I wanted to ask how you're coming to this work and how you can see using these benchmarks in your own pitches. Do you think it's going to be something that you can implement right away? It might even be something that we're doing and we're just not cognizant that we're doing when we're looking at these numbers. How are you all coming into this and sitting into this after the last, up until right now? Are there still questions on how benchmarking can kind of add to your story, emphasize your story?
Does anybody want to share an example of how they might use some of this information to tell a story? Jasmine says, trying to figure out how to utilize them when starting out an individual giving program. So, I mean, obviously the story that you're telling at that point is this is where we begin, right? And how you share what you hope your trajectory will be based on what your current spend is, what your current acquisition rate is, what it currently costs you to raise $1, and knowing the stepwise growth, hopefully, that people are expecting in terms of both organizational growth as well as your development program.
It also understanding the building blocks of the benchmarks, especially when you're at like this starting point in collecting your data in an individual giving program specifically, it helps you kind of map out what data you need and how you need to track that. That's one thing that, is maybe a larger conversation of like, okay, let's do some world setting here. How often are we tracking this type of information? Can I pull a total dollars raised? Is that the same? Do I have a clear understanding of what total dollars raised means? And does that align with my development directors or my EDs or the finance department? How, can I pull my average donor lifetime? How does that look? Are we being consistent with that data? It helps you kind of make sure that all of your systems and all of the, cogs in this machine are running the way you want them to. So I think you're really at a good starting point and you're in an advantage starting and figuring out like, okay, what does this look like? And how do we want to set ourselves up to be able to, come back next year and repeat this process? So also something to keep in mind when you're beginning this benchmarking journey. Click. Are you doing separate calculations between different levels of giving smaller online gifts versus high net worth major donors? And how do you calculate the staff time cost by hours spent on each activity?
That's a lot of math.
Oof.
So I would definitely think about breaking out the calculations between online gifts, if you're doing a hard copy mail campaign, because the calculations for what it costs to do those, even those two types of solicitations, quite different. Um, so I would say definitely break out the different kinds of channels that you're using for your more grassroots giving. Um, and definitely I would separate the cost out of the major donor or high net worth donors. Again, when we get into those bigger high net worth donors and things like that, same thing with institutions. You're dedicating a lot more time to it, both in strategy, right? Like when you're getting your whole team together to look at your cases and take a look at your pipeline for major gifts. That's an hour of everybody's time who's in the room at whatever their hourly rate is to talk about whatever these cases are. And obviously, that's also dividing among, maybe everybody's bringing in 6 or 8 cases in their portfolio to talk about, right? So it can be a little bit stickier there. But what I tend to do in a situation when you're looking at sort of what does it cost you to acquire a dollar in a major gift context is thinking about generally overall, like how many people are dedicated to the major gift effort, what does it cost us to have them here as part of our team, and then overall, what is the team bringing in, and how does that compare to the rate of giving from the previous year, how many solicitations happened last year, and how much did it yield? Again, there's like a bunch of little numbers that you can kind of feed into the conversation about what it takes to get you where you need to go. But I would definitely calculate the major gift expenses or pardon me, the efficiency of your major gift effort differently from the smaller gifts or more grassroots giving.
Absolutely. And like it could be because you have a different story to tell with your major donors versus your grassroots donors, right? You might be trying to make a different pitch, resource allocation, of maybe a different type of messaging tactic. Your major donor tactics don't always feed into your grassroots donors tactics, and they won't always align. So again, it's what story do you want to tell and what pitch do you want to make for both? They could be very different. They're very different donors sometimes. So making sure you're keeping that aligned and making sure you are coming to the metrics, not just to, have a benchmark on major donors and you have a number. You can have all the data you need to. I remember again, harkening back to the last session that we had with Maria and the Goldilocks situation, we can have all the data and run all the numbers, but what does that mean? What story are we telling, and how do we want to use this number, and what insight does that provide for us in context? So quickly moving forward to industry standards and benchmarking against industry standards. So benchmarking against industry standards sounds lofty and scary. I know it always did to me because I worked in small organizations and I'm like, how am I supposed to take these big numbers or these numbers that I'm seeing fundraising experts kind of talking about and apply them to my small dollar individual donor campaign? But it doesn't mean that benchmarking against the industry standards doesn't mean you're failing if you're not meeting these key indicators. That is why they exist. It's not to tell you you are not performing at the level of the American Red Cross. You are not meeting these numbers at all. It's to help kind of world build for you, right? So remember, benchmarking against industry standards doesn't mean you're failing to meet these key indicators. We've applied these rules, and I should have put quotation marks because they're not really rules, but they're just things to remember when you're looking at industry standards and you're seeing these big numbers in articles or other trainings and conversations. But consider benchmarks to find the trends in your data. Compare your numbers to industry benchmarks to spot strengths and weaknesses. Always benchmark against yourself. You are your own industry. You are the expert in you. So make sure to track year over year. Track that to be able to highlight improvement in your strategies. Maybe you are seeing that, a certain type of messaging that worked 2 years ago and what, helped you join an upswing in your donors is actually falling flat. So we need to figure out what's happening there. Is it the donor list? Is it the type of channel we're trying to get to those donors? Benchmark against yourself. It's going to help you kind of pick out where your stock gaps are. Then again, use benchmarks in your annual fundraising plan. Use benchmarks to identify where to scale investment and where to fix inefficiencies. This is going back again to that big scenario of just walking into a room with a $5 million budget, right? If you have your benchmarks, you have your ROI set, you know what your CPDR is, you know what your donor lifetime value is, you can really negotiate. I take it back. I don't know how well you can negotiate it, but you can absolutely make the case about what realistic expectations and what realistic fundraising looks for you in this current time. So here at PM, we are big fans of M&R benchmarking, and we kind of refer to them all the time. They are a wonderful resource to have. These are some of the top line benchmarks that they released earlier this year. Again, highlighting nuance and a teaspoon of salt when you read this. The organizations that are participating in this benchmarking and in this data pool are large organizations. That is, the Red Cross, Feeding America, SLPC, the Southern Poverty Law Center. They're all within this, but it is just taking a look at what kind of the industry is seeing as a big hole in philanthropy. So again, if your online revenue didn't increase by 2%, that doesn't mean that you failed that benchmark. But what does that mean for you? If the overall market is showing a 2% increase in online revenue last year, and you don't have a digital giving campaign, is there a consideration to start investing in that strategy and seeing if you can increase your own online revenue by, starting a email campaign or giving opening that channel up to supporters. Thank you, Tiffany, for adding M&R benchmarks. I think they release these annually. So we are due for another one coming up in the next calendar year here, but I would highly recommend starting kind of looking at these industry benchmarks with M&R. The way they kind of present their data is super beautiful and their concepts are wonderful to go through. So we have the source here for you guys to look at. But this is a good starting point. So pulling your story together. Remember, benchmarking will allow you a window into how efficient your fundraising strategies are and if they are working with your resources or against them. Benchmarking can help set realistic goals across the organization and help bridge your programmatic expectations with your fundraising goals. Benchmarking can help you find the most proficient way to connect with your supporters. So kind of summing up that, I want to leave you all with an action plan. Wrong window. So this is, again, benchmarking can be a really intimidating place to stand in and to start in, opening that door. How do we start? So I wanted to kind of outline some next steps for you guys and leave you guys with a way to figure out how to map out your benchmarking journey and how to get started and make that first step. Or if you're already in a benchmarking journey, you can take this and make sure that apply this to what you already are doing and is at that check. So one, create a benchmarking plan, action plan to get you and your organization started. So one, take a piece of paper, empty doc, whatever you work in, whatever works best for you, and start outlining one, the current benchmarks you track, if any. Two, which benchmarks you want to start tracking. So a wish list of benchmarks. Three, what will the benchmark focus on? Which fundraising channel will the data be representing? So your major donors, your recurring donors, your acquisition donors, who are those donors? Or it could be your email campaign. It could be your direct mail campaign. Start by outlining those and making sure that those are set. 4, what story will the benchmark tell? Again, will it be highlighting the organizational investment, your year over progress? What do you want this benchmark to help you with when you're making a pitch? 5, how will the benchmark be used? Is it going to be used in board reports? Is it going to be used to help provide context when you're going into strategy planning and organizational budgeting for the year? Really kind of make sure you're set on how you want to use that benchmark. And 6, the last one, what's the first step you're going to take to set up that benchmark? I know for some of us who might be starting off, it's, ooh, I need to figure out the first, action that I need to do is I need to figure out if I have access to all this information. Do I have access to the full expenses I'm going to need to be able to calculate my CPGR and ROI? Is my CRM equipped right now, and is it tracking average donor amount or donor lifetime value? What does that look like? Can I easily pull it? Do we have dashboards and reports set up to support the establishment of these benchmarkings to move forward? I have a worksheet that will be sent out in a follow-up email that we're going to have for you guys at the end of this. So, okay, if you don't have this full slide right now, but we've developed a little worksheet for you guys to help kind of outline what this project plan is. And the hope is that it'll get you asking questions and pulling in the folks that need to be pulled in to start these benchmarking. Maybe it's, what teammates you need to bring in to get the full cost of what the expenses to run a campaign, or you want your database manager to be able to keep an eye on some of these numbers and these foundational blocks of these benchmarks to help earmark anything that changes for you, so that'll clue you in that you need to run this benchmark again because you're seeing that there's an uptick in donors. So what does that mean there? A lot. Benchmarking is a lot. But what are 2 things you learned in today's session? And even in last session, if you watched it, what is something that 2 things that you're going to come away with and, at the, 30-minute mark when we pop off, what will you have learned and what will you be taking away and starting conversations on?
Friends, we use this information about what you're learning in these sessions to help us figure out what we're going to deliver in future sessions. So please let us know the things that you're taking away today, or even the questions that you're going to be asking your colleagues as you walk out of here, to help you figure out what you're going to do next based on what we're sharing today.
Yeah, and Liz says here, I'm excited to speak a different language when donor targeting. It's not so much amounts, but a much more nuanced figure. Absolutely. And it helps you get the full picture, right? Of who is in your donor base. It's much more than that's a $10 donor, right? Like I'm looking at this person, they're a $10 donor. When you can really talk to them about actually they're a high value donor because they've been with us for like 20 years and they give to us every month, $10 a month. They are a really impactful community member supporting our organization that have bought in from the beginning. That changes your directory and how you're framing your supporter base, right? It helps kind of reorient also the pitch a lot of us have to make to our board members and our EDs about what investment and capacity building looks like for a lot of us. That I know is a hard conversation to have for a lot of us in the fundraising field is what does investment in fundraising look like? Where does that money go? and how is that money used. These benchmarks really help us do that. So I hope that helps you as well coming there. What questions do you all still have on benchmarking?
I have more of a question about like making a case for strategies we're maybe not using right now. Like if you
Yeah.
don't have the data to back it up, what your recommendation is. So, for example, our organization really doesn't use social media or
Okay.
like our website to make asks to our donor. And I think that we can do a much better job of doing that, especially because it's so low effort and so low cost.
Mhm.
But if it's not something that we're doing, it maybe do we present like the figures that we have for our current fundraising strategies? And
Yeah.
I'm just curious, like where we can how we can make that case to our team.
That is where I would say the industry standard kind of benchmarking comes into play, like looking at that M&R data that's sent out. I know that they have social media benchmarking and like digital online revenue benchmarks and figures there for you to use. I would take that, right? That 2% increase in online revenue for all, all nonprofits in the year 2024 alone. What would that look like for you? There, you can use them. Like we are seeing across the industry that donors are choosing to use to, you know, choosing the digital channel using our web pages, email, whatever that looks like, to interact with their nonprofits of choice. We should, let's take a look at now what our direct mail is looking at look like right now. We're seeing a downward trend over the last 3 years. This could be a tactic to help kind of bridge that downward swing that way. So definitely use that's where industry standards and industry benchmarks can have some great impact there too. Tiffany, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I just wanted to add adjacent right below that statistic about the 2% increase in giving through the digital channels. There was also a 78 cents on the dollar through direct mail versus digital strategies, if I recall. Yep, there it is.
Mm-hmm.
So even Kate, telling the story with your colleagues about the fact that right now the standard is that it's costing you that you're only getting 78 cents out of every dollar you're getting through your direct mail versus what you could be getting online. I think that's really important, right? That is a discrepancy that is meaningful in
Mm-hmm.
terms of how much revenue you could be raising. And so, yes, it's true that you may have bigger upfront costs if your channels online are not really open and you've got to create a web page and make sure that you're signed up to use Venmo, PayPal, Zelle, Google, whatever.
Yeah.
Recognizing that, like, yeah, there's some setup costs there, and that's not negligible. Those costs are very real. But they're also mostly not renewable costs, right? Like the setup fees are much more expensive than the annual sort of maintenance of these things, versus the fact that when you're doing direct mail, like those costs are the same and or going up every time you do it, right? Every mailing is roughly the same number of pieces, and the paper costs this much, and the envelopes cost that much, and postage may be more expensive, whatever. There's going to be fluctuations in that. They're rarely going to go down.
Yeah.
Um, and you're seeing that the return is not as high as when you have an established channel that's digital.
Yeah, we have like a pretty decent following on Instagram and TikTok. So it's a little bit frustrating for me not to see that used to its full potential because it's really so simple to just add a donation link when we get, more views on our
Absolutely.
page.
Absolutely. And I know that industry benchmarking against industry standards, yes, we have these big data pools, these, M&R, doing these reports for us, but you can also take a look at a like organization, right? Take a look at an organization that is about your size, maybe in an area similar to yours, doing similar work and compare their social media kind of their reach and if they have a donation page, a lot of that information, you can take a look at their annual report to see like, hey, like they actually have looks like they have a successful they had a successful fundraising year last year. Maybe we can infer that their strong digital presence, they're adding donation links. Maybe some of that could be coming from their online presence and offering their donors this additional channel to engage with us as well. I know we also talk about like bridging and making us accessible to our donors. So you can use that as well. Use that information that you have of your strong presence on social media. Like they want to interact with us in this digital space, and we're not meeting them where they're at right now. So here are the industry standards for online revenue generation and how it works. You know, here's my pitch on that first investment in starting these channels up. Yes, Tiffany, thank you. This is why making relationships with other fundraisers is so important. And I would recommend that when you're in spaces similar to these and have opportunities to come together, that you connect with each other so that you can take these stories and these anecdotes back and, you know, help build in to your storytelling that you need to have with your ED, with your, you know, CFO, so that you can take them back and be like, hey, I connected with Liz Dupuy, and I know, you know, she was talking about how successful her online giving program was, and I just kind of wanted to talk about what that might look like for us in our context. There, you get these real world experiences and opportunities to connect with like individuals. So I would always recommend having conversations, coming, connecting. We're happy to be that kind of space to bring everyone together. I know we're almost at time. We have a little less than 10 minutes. One thing, thank you, Tiffany, I wanted to ask of everyone who's on the call right now. Tiffany just posted a link to a survey on today's training. Again, we use any feedback that's provided to help tailor these learnings for you all. We absolutely review them and see how we can better our delivery of the materials, what you all are looking for, how we can pivot, and if there's anything that we can add into these sessions as well. We definitely review those, and we'll take those into when we're developing the new round of these trainings. Again, these trainings are for you all. So we want to meet you where you're at. So please, if you have a moment, feel free to fill out that survey link. I'm going to turn off the recording because I want to open up the kind of space for questions, so you know, and have a kind of go ahead conversation. So I'm going to turn that off. I will do that.